The phone rang just as the tide changed. It was early, that gray kind of morning when the world feels half awake, and the sound sliced through the calm like a blade through silk. I didn't look at the screen. I just picked up. "Mom," my son said, his tone brisk, like a man calling a business partner. "The villa's sold." For a moment I thought I misheard him. "What?" He exhaled sharply. "We sold it, the oceanfront villa. We're moving tomorrow." Then came her voice, smooth, measured, full of that kind of sweetness that tastes like metal. "We needed the money," Evelyn said. The words hit harder than I expected. I looked out the window at the light crawling across the water, the same view Richard and I used to watch every morning. "You sold it," I repeated, "without even asking?" Evelyn's laughter floated through the line. "Oh, Mother, don't make this dramatic. It's just a house." Just a house. My husband's hands had built that place board by board. He'd poured his heart into every beam, every window frame. I could still hear him saying, "When I'm gone, you'll always have this. It'll keep you safe, even from them." Now I understood what he meant. I didn't answer. I didn't shout or plead. I let the silence stretch until it felt heavy enough to make them both uncomfortable. "If that's what you've done," I finally said, "then there's nothing more to say." Michael hesitated. "Mom, we didn't mean to hurt you. You weren't using it. You..." Click. The call ended. I stared at the quiet phone, my own reflection staring back, older, steadier than I remembered. I put it down gently, like I was laying a flower on a grave. Outside, gulls were circling the waves, crying against the wind, the same wind that used to carry Richard's laughter through the open windows of that house. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the sound of Evelyn's voice, smooth as honey and just as sticky. She'd been managing the family accounts since Richard passed. Michael trusted her with everything. I used to think that was fine. Love needs trust, I told myself. But I'd forgotten that trust without boundaries is a weapon waiting to be used. When Richard died, he left me one note. Just one. It was folded neatly in his handwriting, tucked inside the pages of his favorite book. "Don't rush to act. Let people show you who they really are, then decide." I didn't understand it then. Now I did. The next morning, I drove to the coast. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky pale gold. The villa stood there, tall and white against the ocean. It looked exactly the same, which somehow made it worse. A moving truck sat at the gate, boxes piled like towers of betrayal. I parked across the street and watched. 2 men were carrying my things out, our dining table, the one Richard had sanded himself. A young woman with dark hair was giving orders, probably the buyer. She had no idea the story those walls held. I gripped the steering wheel and thought about walking over, about shouting that they had no right. But Richard's words stopped me again. "Don't rush." Instead, I turned off the engine and sat still. My fingers brushed against my wedding ring. I'd kept wearing it all these years because somehow it made me feel protected, safe. That's when I remembered something else. The day Richard signed the papers for the villa, Evelyn was there, smiling too wide, asking too many questions. And Richard, calm as ever, had said, "Don't worry, dear. The house isn't really in our name anymore." At the time, I'd laughed, thinking he meant it as a joke. But Richard didn't joke about money. He never did. I opened my purse and took out the small leather folder he'd left me after the funeral. I hadn't looked inside since that day. My hands trembled as I unzipped it. Inside, there were documents, company letters, legal seals, signatures, and right at the top, a name I hadn't noticed before, Blue Harbor, LLC. I whispered it out loud, feeling the words taste strange in my mouth. Blue Harbor. That was the holding company Richard had set up years ago, long before Evelyn even married Michael. And the owner listed on the last page wasn't Richard. It wasn't Michael. It was me. My heartbeat steadied for the first time in hours. So this was what he meant by keeping me safe. Richard had always been clever with numbers, but this This was art. He had tied the villa up in a web of protection so tight that no one could touch it without my signature. They thought they'd sold it. They hadn't sold a thing. A strange calm washed over me, colder than the sea air. My anger slipped away, replaced by something stronger, clarity. I started the car again and glanced one last time at the house. They could move their boxes, change the locks, even repaint the walls. It wouldn't matter, because the papers still said it was mine. As I drove home, I smiled for the first time since the call. Richard's plan had worked. My son and his wife thought they'd outsmarted me, but they'd only outsmarted themselves. Still, I knew this was only the beginning. People like Evelyn don't stop when they think they've won. They keep digging until they find the bottom. And when she realized what Richard had done, she'd come looking for a new way to take what wasn't hers. But this time, I'd be ready. The ocean disappeared in my rearview mirror, replaced by the long road home. The air smelled of salt and rain, and somewhere in it, I could almost hear Richard's voice again, steady, certain, almost amused. "Now, Lydia," he said in that calm way of his, "let's see what they do next." I smiled again. I'd just been given a second chance to protect what was mine, and this time, I wouldn't hesitate. When I arrived at the villa later that week, the air inside felt hollow, like a breath held too long. The rooms that once sang with life had gone quiet. I stepped through the front door, and the smell of salt and lemon oil wrapped around me. It was exactly as I remembered, and nothing like it at all. The movers had been efficient. The furniture was gone, the curtains stripped, even the old clock from the hallway missing. Only the faint outlines on the walls showed where the portraits used to hang. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, waiting for someone to say something that would never be said. I walked through each room slowly, my hand brushing along the walls as though the plaster could still remember us. Every touch brought something back. The laughter during storms, the smell of Richard's Sunday coffee, Michael running barefoot through the hall, little ghosts of a family that had once believed love was enough. In the living room, the afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, hitting the floorboards Richard had refinished himself. I could still picture him kneeling there with a paintbrush, humming some old tune from the 70s. When I'd teased him for taking so long, he smiled and said, "The trick is to build things that outlast people, Lydia." He had. Even now, the house still carried him. It was in the angles of light, the patterns of shadow, the quiet strength of wood that had stood against every storm. I could almost hear him telling me, "Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you break." In the corner of the room, a single drawer was left behind. It belonged to the old mahogany desk Richard used for his papers. The movers must have missed it. I knelt down, pulled it open, and found a few forgotten things. A dried fountain pen, a folded map of the coastline, and one small envelope marked Property Records, Blue Harbor LLC. I froze. I'd seen that name before. The same company name on the documents Richard had left me. I held the envelope up to the light. Inside were copies of the villa's registration papers and handwritten notes in Richard's neat, precise script. He'd scribbled reminders to himself. Update tax ID, confirm Lydia's signature, renew company license under trust name. I sat back against the wall, letting the words sink in. He hadn't just protected the villa. He'd built an entire layer of safety around it, a web of legal walls. It wasn't paranoia. It was foresight. For a long time, I'd thought Richard was just meticulous. Now I saw it for what it really was, love, disguised as preparation. He had known that trust in our family could crack, that the people we raised might someday trade decency for convenience. I pressed my fingers against his handwriting. It felt like touching the pulse of someone still living. When I stood again, the late light caught a framed photo lying face down near the fireplace. I turned it over. It was from our 30th anniversary. The four of us smiling, Richard's arm around me, Michael in his sharp gray suit, Evelyn standing beside him, already perfecting that practiced grin. I remembered thinking that day she looked like she belonged to another world, one where love was a tool, not a gift. I set the photo upright on the mantel, then took a deep breath. "You almost had it all," I whispered, "but you didn't count on him." The sound of my voice startled me. I hadn't realized how long I'd been quiet. I went upstairs. The bedrooms were stripped bare, mattresses gone, closets emptied. The echo of my footsteps bounced off the walls. When I reached the master bedroom, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The curtains fluttered with the ocean breeze, carrying the scent of the sea straight through the open windows. On the dresser lay a small jewelry box, mine. The latch had rusted slightly. Inside were a few pieces I'd never wear again. A pearl necklace, 2 silver bracelets, and Richard's wedding band. He'd stopped wearing it when his hands grew thin from illness. I had kept it close ever since. I slipped the ring onto my finger next to my own. It fit loosely now, but it grounded me. I looked out the window toward the horizon where the sun was beginning to sink, turning the water into molten gold. Somewhere out there, the world still believed the villa was sold. The papers said otherwise. A faint knock echoed from downstairs. I turned quickly, heart jumping. Through the thin curtains, I saw a car parked outside. A sleek black sedan I didn't recognize. A woman in a dark suit stepped out, clipboard in hand. She looked like she belonged to the world Evelyn worshipped. Business polished, every smile rehearsed. She rang the bell twice. I didn't answer. She knocked harder. "Mrs. Hartman?" she called. "I'm with Oceanway Realty. Just here to confirm final inspection before the transfer." Transfer? I smiled faintly. She wouldn't be getting what she came for. I stayed quiet, listening as she shifted impatiently. After a minute, she sighed and made a phone call from the porch. "Yes," she said, voice low but sharp. "The seller's mother is here. No, she didn't sign anything. Yes, I'll tell them the paperwork might be delayed." Delayed. I waited until her footsteps faded down the path. Then I closed the window and leaned against the sill, feeling the roughness of the wood under my palms. Richard had outsmarted them before they even began, and now the game had quietly turned in my favor. But I knew people like Evelyn didn't give up. They'd keep pushing, keep pretending everything belonged to them until someone forced them to face the truth, and I would be that someone. As I left the villa, I locked the door behind me and slipped the key into my pocket. The metal was cool, solid, familiar, the last sound of certainty in a world full of pretenders. Driving away, I didn't look back. The sun was setting, the light melting into the sea, and I realized something for the first time. Peace wasn't the absence of noise. It was the quiet confidence of knowing the truth before anyone else did. They thought they had taken everything, but all they'd really done was walk straight into the plan my husband had written years ago, hidden in plain sight. And I was the only one who knew how the story truly ended. 2 days later, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same spot where the phone call had shattered everything. But now, the quiet felt different. It wasn't grief anymore. It was purpose. The envelope from the villa lay in front of me, the words Blue Harbor LLC staring back like a riddle Richard had left me to solve. I made myself a cup of tea, though I barely tasted it. I unfolded each page carefully, as if he might be watching. There were layers of notes written in his familiar, tidy handwriting. Every line, every margin filled with instructions, numbers, and dates. Richard had been meticulous, not out of obsession, but out of love. I realized then that he had seen this day coming. In one corner of the file, a small note was paperclipped to a contract. Final transfer, authorization required from Lydia only. Only me. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a quiet rush of gratitude for the man who had always been 3 steps ahead. Everyone thought Richard was a dreamer, a man who built houses by the sea because he loved beauty. But they didn't know how deliberate he was. Every decision he made had a reason. He'd always said, "Protection isn't paranoia, it's foresight." The sound of my phone buzzing broke the stillness. It was a text from Michael. "Michael, we're finalizing everything today. Please don't make this harder than it already is." Harder? He had no idea what hard meant. I didn't reply. I just smiled faintly and went back to the papers. Among the pages, there was a single folder labeled Shareholder Documents. My name appeared again and again. My signature, dated years ago. Every one of Richard's assets funneled quietly into Blue Harbor, legally airtight, beautifully structured. I felt a pang of guilt beneath the calm. My husband had trusted me to protect what we built, and somehow I'd fallen asleep while our son sold it away. But maybe it wasn't too late to wake up. The last document in the folder was thinner than the rest, almost hidden between 2 blank pages. It was a letter addressed to me in Richard's hand. The paper had yellowed slightly, but his writing was still strong. If you're reading this, Lydia, then something we built is being tested. Don't panic. Everything you need is already in your hands. I made sure the company can't move an inch without your consent. Remember that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. Let them talk. Let them believe they've won, then act. I read it twice, 3 times, tracing the edge of his signature with my thumb. The tears didn't come, but the ache in my chest deepened. He had known this would happen. He had prepared me for it. For a moment, I imagined what he'd say if he were sitting across from me. Probably something simple like, "Now, Lydia, it's your turn." The knock on the door startled me. I folded the letter and tucked it back into the envelope before answering. It was Harper, my granddaughter. She stood there in her college sweatshirt, her face pale, her eyes restless. "Grandma," she said softly, "can I come in?" "Of course, sweetheart." She walked in slowly, looking like someone who had just discovered something she wasn't supposed to see. "Dad and Mom have been acting strange," she said. "Mom's been making phone calls late at night. She said something about documents missing, and Dad, he looks scared." My pulse quickened. "What kind of documents?" Harper shrugged. "She didn't say, but I heard her on the phone this morning. She said, if we don't get her signature, the whole deal falls apart." So that was it. Evelyn had finally realized the trap Richard built, and she was scrambling to find a way out. I smiled gently and poured Harper a cup of tea. "Sweetheart," I said, "if anyone asks you about me, just say I'm fine. Don't tell them where I'm going or what I'm doing. Can you do that?" Harper hesitated. "Grandma, are you in trouble?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "No, darling, I'm not in trouble. I'm just finishing something your grandfather started." Her eyes softened, though confusion lingered behind them. She nodded slowly. "I trust you." Those words hit me harder than she could have known. After she left, I packed the documents into my old leather handbag. There was one person who would understand exactly what these papers meant. Arthur Lang, Richard's old friend and lawyer. He'd retired years ago, but I remembered his voice from our last Christmas together when he'd said over dinner, "If you ever need me again, Lydia, call." I hadn't thought I ever would, but as I looked at the sun lowering behind the pines outside, I knew the time had come. I found his card still tucked in Richard's address book. The ink had faded, but the number was there. When I dialed, the line crackled for a moment before a warm, familiar voice answered. "Arthur Lang speaking." "Arthur," I said softly. "It's Lydia Hartman." A pause, then a surprised laugh. "Lydia? It's been too long. How are you holding up?" "Better now," I said. "I need your help." He didn't ask why. He just said, "Tell me where to meet you." I gave him the address of the small cafe near the marina, the same one where he and Richard used to play chess on Sundays. When I hung up, I stood there for a moment, looking around the kitchen. The house felt alive again. Richard's presence lingered not like a ghost, but like a guide. He hadn't just built a villa, he'd built a shield around the life we shared. And now, it was my turn to use it. I picked up the envelope one last time before heading out. The word Blue Harbor shimmered faintly in the afternoon light. It wasn't just a name, it was a promise. As I locked the door behind me, a new kind of calm settled in. Not the silence of loss, but the stillness that comes right before a storm you're finally ready to face. The cafe near the marina hadn't changed in years. Same scratched tables, same smell of strong coffee and sea salt. When I walked in, I spotted Arthur Lang immediately. He was sitting by the window, his back straight, his white hair catching the light. He looked older, yes, but not smaller. Some people shrink with age. Arthur had become sharper, like time had carved away everything unnecessary. When he saw me, he stood up with a genuine smile. "Lydia Hartman," he said. "You still carry the same calm, I remember." "Appearances can lie," I said, and he chuckled. We sat down. For a moment, we didn't speak. Outside, waves slapped against the pier, gulls circling above the fishing boats. I slid the envelope across the table, the one marked Blue Harbor, LLC. Arthur adjusted his glasses and opened it. His eyes moved slowly over the documents, his fingers tracing the seal at the bottom of the page. He looked impressed. "Richard really was a clever man," he said finally. "He did this perfectly. Blue Harbor is airtight. The villa's ownership sits under this company, which means any sale requires your direct approval." He tapped the line bearing my name. "Without this signature, no transaction is legally binding." "So they can't sell it?" I asked. He smiled, small and sharp. "They can pretend they did. They can even hand over keys. But on paper, in the eyes of the law, they sold nothing. You still own it." I let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The sound of the espresso machine hissed behind us, a small reminder that the world outside this table still existed. Arthur leaned back, folding his hands. "I suppose this isn't about property, though, is it? This is about betrayal." "Yes," I said quietly, "and about making it right." He nodded thoughtfully. "You don't want to fight in court, do you?" "No," I said, "not yet. They still think they're in control. I want them to keep believing that, at least for now." Arthur's smile widened. "Ah, Richard would have liked that. You were always the patient one." "Patience isn't kindness, Arthur," I said. "Not anymore." He laughed softly. "You sound more like him every year." I studied his face, the faint lines that deepened when he smiled. "He knew this would happen," I said. "Didn't he tell you?" Arthur hesitated. Then he said, "He didn't tell me everything, but he left me a note for you. Said to give it only if you ever came to me with this envelope." He reached into his briefcase and took out a small, sealed letter. My name was written on it in Richard's careful script. I felt my heart tighten just looking at it. I opened it slowly, the paper crackling softly. There were only a few lines inside. "Lydia, trust the law, but trust your instincts more. Truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs time. When they finally realize what they've done, let them. Don't destroy them. Reveal them." I closed the letter, my throat tightening. He always wrote as though he knew the future. Arthur watched me quietly. "He always admired your composure. You never let emotion lead the way. That's rare." "I'm not sure it's a gift," I said. "It is when you're holding the kind of truth that burns." For a moment, the only sound was the hum of conversation around us and the whisper of the tide. Then Arthur leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Do you know what Evelyn's trying to do next?" I shook my head. "She's trying to refinance the villa through a private lender. I heard from a friend in the bank. They're using forged documents, old scans of your signature." I frowned. "She doesn't even know the real structure of the company, does she?" "No. She thinks it's simple property under Richard's estate. She has no idea Blue Harbor exists." That gave me a chill of satisfaction. Evelyn's arrogance had always been her weakness. She believed confidence could substitute for competence. Arthur smiled slightly. "If you want, I can file a protective injunction. It'll freeze any attempted transfer." "Not yet," I said. "I want her to step a little deeper first." He raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" I nodded. "She took something that didn't belong to her and called it necessity. Let her show the world who she really is. Then I'll show them who I am." He regarded me for a long moment, then said, "You're not the same woman who used to bring Richard coffee during our meetings." "No," I said softly. She died the day my son sold my house." Arthur didn't argue. Instead, he folded the papers back neatly, slid them into a new envelope, and handed it to me. "Keep this close. And Lydia, don't let guilt slow you down. They made their choices. You're just protecting what's yours." I took it from him, the weight of it heavier than it looked. "Thank you, Arthur." He smiled. "When the time comes, call me again. I want to see how this ends." Outside, the light was beginning to fade, the sky deepening to a cold blue. I walked to the edge of the pier and stood there for a moment, watching the reflection of the water move like shattered glass. For the first time, I didn't feel helpless. I felt ready. The game they thought they were playing had already started years ago, and they didn't even know they were losing. When I turned back toward the parking lot, I saw a car idling across the street. Black, tinted windows, engine running. My pulse quickened. For a second, I thought it might be coincidence, until I saw the shape of Evelyn's red scarf through the windshield. She was watching. I didn't flinch. I unlocked my car, slid in, and started the engine. As I pulled out, our eyes met for just a second through the glass, hers sharp, mine steady. She didn't know it yet, but the balance had shifted. By the time I reached the highway, the letter from Richard was still warm in my pocket. His words echoed in my mind. "Don't destroy them. Reveal them." And that's exactly what I intended to do. The days that followed moved slowly, like air before lightning. On the surface, everything looked calm, but underneath, something was beginning to stir. Evelyn stopped calling. Michael didn't text. Harper sent a short message, just 3 words. "Are you okay?" I told her yes, but the truth was more complicated. I wasn't broken anymore. I was waiting. Every morning, I made coffee and sat by the window overlooking the street. The light would change from gold to gray to blue, and I'd think about the years I spent teaching my son about honesty, about pride, about earning what you have. Somewhere along the line, he'd stopped listening. Maybe Evelyn had spoken louder. I didn't hate them. Not yet. But I couldn't forgive what they had done, not because of the money, but because of the assumption behind it. They had looked at me and seen someone finished, someone harmless. They thought age meant surrender. That was their mistake. One evening, as the wind picked up and the rain started tapping softly against the windows, I turned on the television for background noise. The local news was running a segment about property scams, fake signatures, fraudulent sales, forged transfers. I smiled without meaning to. The universe had a dark sense of humor. I poured another cup of coffee and thought about Evelyn. Her confidence was brittle, the kind that only holds together if no one looks too closely. She'd been quiet for days, which made me certain she was planning something. People like her always are. Later that night, Harper called. Her voice was hushed, like she didn't want someone to hear. "Grandma," she said, "Dad's been different lately. He's not sleeping. Mom keeps telling him everything's fine, but I heard her talking to someone. She said, if she finds out, we're done." "Who's she talking about? Is it you?" "Maybe," I said softly. "But don't worry, sweetheart. Some truths take a little time to come out." "I don't understand what's happening." "You will," I said. "And when you do, you'll see who everyone really is." Harper hesitated, then whispered, "I believe you." After we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, the only sound in the house. Richard's photograph watched me from the mantel, his eyes kind but sharp. "I'm trying," I whispered to him, "just like you would have wanted." The next morning, I decided to visit the villa again. Not to reclaim it, not yet, but to see. The drive was quiet, the sky heavy with clouds. When I turned the last corner, I saw Evelyn's car parked in the driveway. She was standing on the porch with a woman in a gray suit, both holding folders. I stayed in the car, engine off, windows cracked just enough to hear their voices. "I told you the paperwork is handled," Evelyn was saying, her tone clipped. "We'll get the funds as soon as the transfer clears." The woman hesitated. Mrs. Hartman, the bank needs one more confirmation. There's a missing document, something about company ownership. They're saying your mother-in-law's signature is required. Evelyn's jaw tightened. She won't cause trouble. She doesn't even understand half of this. The woman didn't respond right away. Be careful, she said quietly. If she's still listed as the owner, she could block the entire sale. Evelyn's eyes flashed, cold and calculating. Then we'll make sure she doesn't. That was enough. I started the car before they could notice me and drove off. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. So they hadn't learned anything yet. They were still playing with forged papers, still trying to use my name as if I were a ghost. When I got home, I called Arthur. They're moving faster, I said. I suspected they would, he replied. They think the first transaction fell through because of a clerical error. They have no idea it's by design. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the light shifting across the ceiling. Then it's time to remind them that silence doesn't mean surrender. Arthur chuckled quietly. What do you have in mind? Not a fight, I said. A reminder. The next morning I mailed a letter to the same bank Evelyn had tried to use. No threats, no accusations, just a copy of the Blue Harbor registration form, clearly listing my name as majority owner with a short handwritten note at the bottom. Any transfer without my consent is void. No signature needed. They already knew whose handwriting it was. By noon, I received an email from an assistant manager at the bank, politely thanking me for the clarification and confirming that all pending transactions involving the villa were frozen for review. I didn't smile, but the satisfaction ran deep and quiet. That night, I sat outside on the porch as the sun went down. The cicadas hummed, the air smelled of pine, and the world felt strangely balanced again. I wasn't celebrating. I was simply breathing. When the phone rang, I let it buzz 3 times before answering. Mom, Michael's voice came through, tight, almost trembling. What did you do? I'm not sure what you mean, I said softly. The bank called. They froze everything. Evelyn's furious. She says you... He stopped, his breath shaking. Why are you doing this? I let the question hang there before replying. I'm not doing anything, Michael. I'm just protecting what your father built, what we built. You wouldn't understand that. You're ruining us, he said. I almost laughed. No, dear, I'm saving what's left of us. He hung up. The silence afterward was heavier than before, but it wasn't painful. It was peaceful, like the pause between thunder and rain. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the stars beginning to pierce the dark. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was for people who still expected decency. What I felt now was clarity. Evelyn had drawn the line. Now it was my turn to step over it. The storm was coming, but I was ready to meet it head on. The next few days passed in a strange stillness, the kind that hums beneath the surface like electricity before a storm. I spent my mornings walking by the coast, watching the waves crash and retreat, steady and certain. The air smelled of salt and something sharper, change. By the time I returned home each afternoon, I knew Evelyn would be moving again. She wasn't the type to sit quietly when her control began to slip. I was right. That Thursday, I received an unmarked envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature. Just a message typed in all caps. Stop interfering. You're making things worse for everyone. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was clumsy. Evelyn had always underestimated me, even when she was pretending to admire me. She thought intimidation worked on everyone the same way, but fear is a choice, and I'd stopped choosing it a long time ago. I burned the note in the kitchen sink and watched the paper curl into gray ash. Then I picked up the phone and called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Caleb Rowe, Richard's old accountant. Caleb had worked with Richard since before Michael was born. He was the kind of man who remembered every decimal, every dotted line, every conversation about money that mattered. When he answered, his voice was gravelly and warm. Lydia Hartman, he said. Haven't heard that name in too long. What brings you back to the land of numbers? I need you to look into something, I said. It's about Blue Harbor LLC. There was a pause. Richard's company? You still have that? I do, I said. And apparently, so does my son's wife. At least, she thinks she does. Caleb sighed softly. I'm not surprised. That woman always had ambition written all over her face, the dangerous kind. She's been trying to sell the villa, I said, without my consent. I think she's used forged signatures. I'll pull the records, he said immediately. If she's moved money through any of the accounts, we'll find it. You remember how Richard set it up? Nothing leaves without a trace. I remember, I said. That's why I'm calling you. By the next morning, Caleb had already emailed me a summary, a tidy, professional report in the way only accountants can manage. He wrote that funds had been quietly funneled out of an inactive Blue Harbor sub-account 6 weeks ago. Nearly $200,000 transferred to a new company under Evelyn's name. She had called it Hartman Future Holdings. The irony was almost poetic. Caleb had added one line at the end of his message. She's clever, but not Richard clever. I stared at the screen for a long time before shutting the laptop. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about watching deceit unravel. Later that day, Harper stopped by unannounced. She looked nervous, her eyes darting toward the windows as if someone might be watching. "Grandma," she whispered, "Mom's been saying awful things about you. She told Dad you're losing your mind. She said you're dangerous." I smiled faintly. Did she now? She's been going through old files, calling lawyers. She even asked me if I'd seen you meeting anyone. Harper's voice shook a little. I don't like it. She's scared of something, and when she's scared, she gets mean. I reached out and took her hand. "Sweetheart, do you remember what your grandfather used to say?" Harper frowned. "That truth always floats?" I nodded. "Exactly. No matter how deep people try to bury it, it always rises to the surface." She bit her lip. "So what are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said. "Not yet. I just need her to keep talking." Because Evelyn's biggest weakness wasn't greed, it was pride. When pride feels cornered, it starts confessing by accident. That evening, I drove to Caleb's office. It was a small building downtown, the kind of place people forget exists until they need it. Caleb greeted me with his usual gentle formality and poured me a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt sugar. He slid a folder across the desk. "Everything you asked for. Bank statements, transfers, email logs. She's been siphoning small amounts for months, just enough to avoid red flags." I opened the folder, my eyes scanning the neat columns of numbers. Every transfer had Evelyn's fingerprints, names of fake consultants, payments to shell companies, even a few donations to charities that didn't exist. "She's bold," I said quietly. Caleb nodded. "Bold or desperate. My guess is the villa wasn't about money. It was about control. People like her don't want wealth. They want proof they can take it." He leaned forward. "You have every right to bring this to the authorities." "Not yet," I said. "I don't want to fight in the dark. I want light. When she falls, I want everyone to see it." Caleb looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Richard would be proud," he said. "He always said you were the only one who could win without raising your voice." As I left his office, the city lights shimmered against the glass buildings, reflections rippling like water. The world was full of people who believed that silence meant submission. But silence could be a weapon too, a quiet kind of justice. When I reached home, I found another envelope waiting by my door. This one was handwritten in neat cursive. Inside was a photograph. Evelyn standing at the villa's gate, smiling beside a man I didn't recognize. On the back, a message. "She's selling more than you think." I didn't know who sent it, but I didn't need to. The truth was already starting to show itself, and all I had to do was let it keep surfacing. The seeds were planted. All that was left was to let them grow. By the end of the week, the perfect image Evelyn had spent years polishing began to crack. It started quietly, the way most downfalls do, not with thunder but with whispers. I first heard it at the grocery store. A woman I barely knew leaned in and said, "I saw your daughter-in-law on the news. Some kind of issue with a property sale, wasn't it? I smiled politely, feigning surprise, but inside, a flicker of satisfaction warmed me. It was happening faster than I'd expected. The storm I'd felt brewing had finally touched ground. Later that afternoon, Harper showed up again. She didn't even take off her coat before saying, "Grandma, Dad's a mess. He keeps shouting on the phone. Mom's saying it's all your fault." "My fault?" I said, amused. "She said you called the bank and ruined everything. She said they might lose the villa, the cars, even the house." I poured her a glass of water and handed it to her. "Sweetheart, sometimes people destroy themselves and call it sabotage. It makes it easier to live with." Harper frowned. "I don't understand." "You will," I said softly. "You're too kind to see through people yet, but kindness doesn't mean blindness. Someday you'll learn that." She looked down at her hands. "Dad's scared, Grandma. I've never seen him like this." I wanted to tell her that fear was good. It meant the truth was closing in. But I didn't. I just stroked her hair gently, the way I used to when she was a child, and said, "Tell him I'm thinking of him." That evening, the phone rang again. I let it go to voicemail at first, but the same number called 3 more times. On the 4th, I answered. "Mom," Michael's voice broke through, hoarse and trembling. "You need to stop whatever you're doing. You don't understand what's at stake." "I understand perfectly," I said calmly. "I just don't agree. They're freezing everything. Evelyn's furious, the buyers are threatening to sue, and the bank says there's an investigation. Do you have any idea what that means?" "Yes," I said. "It means the truth is finally showing up." He cursed under his breath. "Why can't you ever just let things go?" "Because your father didn't raise me to let thieves win," I said. "And he certainly didn't raise you to become one." For a moment, the line went silent, except for his uneven breathing. Then he whispered, "You don't understand. We were drowning." "You were living beyond your means," I corrected. "And Evelyn was the one pulling you under." He didn't reply. Then, in a smaller voice, he said, "She said it would fix everything. She said the villa was just sitting there. She said you wouldn't care." I closed my eyes, the ache returning. "Michael, when did you stop knowing me?" He didn't answer. The line clicked dead. I sat in the stillness for a long time, the air heavy with the weight of everything unsaid. Outside, rain began to fall, steady and relentless. The next morning, I woke to a knock at the door. When I opened it, Evelyn was standing there. Her hair was perfectly arranged, her lips painted, her expression calm, but her eyes betrayed her. She looked cornered. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside wordlessly. She walked into the living room like she still owned every space she entered, though her confidence was fading around the edges. She turned to face me. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, "but you're ruining your son's life." "My son's life," I repeated, "wasn't mine to ruin. He did that himself when he sold something that wasn't his." Her jaw tightened. "You think you're clever, hiding behind lawyers and old documents. You don't understand the pressure we're under. The investors are calling. The loans." "The lies," I interrupted. Her mouth opened, then closed. She didn't expect me to be so blunt. I stepped closer, my voice even but sharp. "You married my son for security, Evelyn. Don't pretend it was for love. And now that your little empire is collapsing, you're scrambling to rewrite the story. But you can't. The truth doesn't take bribes." For the first time, she looked unsure. "You can't win this," she whispered. "I already have," I said. "You just haven't realized it yet." Evelyn's composure cracked. Her voice rose, no longer calm. "Do you have any idea what we've risked for this? What we've lost?" "I know exactly what you've lost," I said. "Integrity. And that's not something you can buy back." She stared at me for a long moment, eyes glistening with anger, or maybe fear. Then she turned sharply and left, slamming the door behind her. I exhaled slowly, the sound mingling with the rain outside. The confrontation had drained me, but beneath the exhaustion, something stronger pulsed, a sense of justice coming into focus. When I called Arthur later that evening, he already knew. "The news is spreading fast," he said. "There's talk of an audit. They've pulled Evelyn's records for review, and Michael's business, well, it's collapsing under the same debts he tried to hide." "Let them burn their own bridges," I said quietly. "I'm done saving people who tried to sink me." Arthur paused. "You know, Lydia, this isn't just about revenge. You're teaching them something they'll never forget." "I hope so," I said, "but I'm not doing it for them. I'm doing it for me, for Richard, for peace." When the call ended, I walked to the window. Across the street, I saw the faint outline of a car, Evelyn's again, parked under the lamppost, watching, waiting. But she wasn't the predator anymore. The light rain shimmered against the glass as I whispered to the night, "Let it fall. Let everything fall." And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. It was nearly sunset when I decided to go. The air along the coast felt sharp, almost metallic, carrying that scent that always came before a storm. I didn't plan this confrontation. I just knew it had to happen. Some truths can't be spoken through lawyers or letters. They need to be looked in the eye. The drive to the villa was quiet, the road shimmering gold and violet under the dying light. When I turned the corner and saw the house rise before me, I felt a chill run through me. It was beautiful still, even after everything, its tall windows catching the reflection of the sea, the white stone glowing softly like it had a memory of the man who built it. Richard had loved this place. He used to say it was our last chapter by the water. I smiled sadly, because he was wrong. It wasn't our last chapter. It was mine. Evelyn's car was already there. The front door was open, light spilling out onto the porch. I could hear faint music playing from inside, soft jazz, the kind she always played when guests came over. Pretending was her favorite armor. I stepped through the doorway. She was standing in the living room, wearing one of those dresses that looked expensive but cold. A glass of red wine in her hand, nails perfectly polished, as if chaos couldn't touch her. When she saw me, her eyes widened slightly before she forced a smile. "Mother," she said, smooth and slow, "I didn't expect you." "I can see that," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. "Beautiful evening, isn't it?" She gestured toward the glass doors that opened to the terrace. "The ocean's been lovely these past few days. I've been thinking of repainting the patio. It deserves a fresh start." "A fresh start," I repeated, walking slowly toward the center of the room. "Funny choice of words. It seems you've been planning quite a few of those lately." Her smile flickered. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope, the same one Arthur had given me, the official Blue Harbor ownership papers, signed and sealed. I placed it gently on the coffee table between us. "That's the only fresh start this house will ever have." Evelyn stared at the envelope but didn't move. "You can't just walk in here and make accusations. Everything we've done was legal." I tilted my head. "Legal is such a flexible word in your mouth." Her eyes darkened. "You think you've won, don't you?" "I think," I said softly, "that your confidence is louder than your understanding." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the ocean wind brushing against the windows. Then Evelyn set down her wine and crossed her arms. "You're destroying your own son's life. You've already humiliated him. Do you know what the neighbors are saying? What the papers are saying?" "Yes," I said. "That's why I'm here." "What do you want?" she demanded. I stepped closer until only the coffee table separated us. "I want you to look around, Evelyn. Every tile, every beam, every window. This house wasn't yours to sell. It never was. It belongs to the company Richard built, the company in my name. You've been living in someone else's home, pretending it was your victory." Her lips trembled slightly before she steadied herself. "We needed the money." "Then you should have earned it," I said, "not stolen it." The tension between us tightened like a wire. She tried to hold my gaze, but her eyes kept shifting. I saw fear flicker there, the kind that comes when someone realizes their kingdom is built on sand. "You're bluffing," she said finally. "You wouldn't do this. You're too proud to make a scene." I smiled faintly. "Pride isn't my problem, Evelyn. Evidence is yours." Her jaw clenched. "You wouldn't dare." At that moment, a sound came from the hallway. Evelyn froze. I turned slightly to see Harper standing by the door, her phone in her hand, recording quietly. Her face was pale, but her eyes were fierce. "Mom," she said softly, "stop lying." Evelyn spun around. "Harper, what are you doing here?" "I followed Grandma," she said. "I wanted to hear the truth." Evelyn's voice cracked. "Turn that off!" But Harper didn't move. "No, I'm tired of pretending too." For a moment, Evelyn just stood there, caught between fury and shame. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her perfect composure fracturing like thin glass. "You've ruined everything," she hissed at me. "No," I said, my voice low. "You did that the moment you chose greed over love." Evelyn turned sharply, her eyes glistening. For the first time, I thought she might cry. But instead, she grabbed her purse, snatched her keys, and stormed past us toward the door. The wind slammed it shut behind her, echoing through the villa like a verdict. The silence that followed was heavy, almost holy. Harper lowered her phone slowly, her hands shaking. "Grandma," she whispered, "I didn't mean to make things worse." I walked over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't. You made them real." She looked at me, eyes wide with worry. "What happens now?" I glanced toward the envelope still lying untouched on the table, the faint imprint of Richard's signature visible under the lamplight. "Now," I said, "the truth does what it always does. It finds its way home." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, deep and steady. The storm had finally arrived. And this time, I wasn't afraid of the rain. The storm rolled in overnight, and by morning the ocean had turned wild. The wind howled against the villa's walls, as if it wanted to peel the truth straight out of them. I didn't sleep much after Evelyn left. I sat in the study, surrounded by the faint scent of salt and cedar, watching the lightning flicker over the water. Every flash felt like a punctuation mark on what had happened. The confrontation, the cracks in Evelyn's voice, the quiet courage in Harper's eyes. When the sun rose, the air felt heavy but calm. I made coffee and began sorting through the old boxes in the study, the ones Richard used to keep under his desk. Most were filled with blueprints, contracts, and memories of a man who never did anything halfway. My fingers brushed over an old wooden box at the very bottom, smaller than the rest, carved with initials that read RLH. The lock was rusted, but it gave way after a gentle twist with a letter opener. Inside, I found a small silver USB drive and a folded note in Richard's familiar handwriting. The paper had yellowed slightly, but the ink was bold as ever. "Lydia," it began, "if you're reading this, you're probably fighting a battle I tried to prevent. I couldn't stop people from being greedy, but I could make sure they'd never win. Everything you need to protect what's ours is here. Let truth be your lawyer." I sat there for a long time, holding that little drive in my hand. It was warm from my touch, but it felt heavier than gold. I plugged it into Richard's old laptop, half afraid it wouldn't turn on after years of neglect. But the screen flickered to life, slow and faithful, like an old friend refusing to leave me in silence. The first file that opened was a video. Richard sat at his desk in this same study, wearing the same kind of sweater he always wore on Sunday mornings. His hair was grayer, his face softer than I remembered, but his eyes, those steady, thoughtful eyes, were exactly the same. "If you're seeing this, sweetheart," he said, his voice calm but certain, "then things have gone the way I feared. You always believed in people more than I did. It's one of the reasons I loved you. But you were right about one thing. Love without protection invites destruction. That's why I built Blue Harbor the way I did. You're its true anchor." He paused, leaning closer to the camera. "I know Michael means well, even if he's lost right now. Don't hate him, just let the truth catch up to him." "But Evelyn," his jaw tightened, "she reminds me of the kind of people who mistake manipulation for intelligence. Don't fight her with anger. Fight her with proof. That's how you win, Lydia. Quietly. Completely." The video ended with him smiling faintly, as if he already knew I'd need that reminder. I felt tears slip down my cheeks, not from sadness, but from clarity. He had left me a map, and I finally knew where it led. I opened the other files, dozens of scanned contracts, emails, and transaction logs, everything Evelyn had tried to forge or hide. There were timestamps, signatures, and cross-references that would hold up in any courtroom. Richard had been watching long before he died. Maybe he'd sensed what she was capable of. Maybe he'd built this armor for me, knowing one day I'd need it. I copied the files onto a new drive and tucked it into my purse. Then I called Arthur. "I found something," I said. His voice sharpened. "What kind of something?" "The kind that speaks for itself," I replied. He was silent for a moment, then said, "Bring it by my office. I'll make sure it's protected." I hesitated. "Not yet. There's one more thing I have to do." "Lydia," he said slowly, "you've already won. Don't go chasing ghosts." "This isn't about ghosts," I said. "It's about closure." After hanging up, I stood by the window, staring out at the churning sea. The waves slammed against the rocks below, spraying salt mist into the air. It reminded me of Richard's favorite saying, "The tide always turns." Maybe he was right. Later that afternoon, Harper stopped by again, soaked from the rain. "Dad's gone," she said breathlessly. "He left this morning. He didn't say where he was going. Mom's been locked in the bedroom all day." I nodded slowly. The storm tends to separate what can stand from what can't. She looked at me curiously. "What are you going to do now, Grandma?" "I'm going to remind them that honesty has a longer memory than deceit." Harper frowned, but I smiled. "Don't worry, sweetheart. No shouting, no fighting, just truth." She hesitated, then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I still have the video from the villa," she said. "Mom yelling, you staying calm. I didn't show it to anyone yet." "Keep it safe," I said. "It might come in handy someday." After she left, I drove to the marina and sat in my car, the USB still clutched in my hand. The waves crashed against the docks, the air thick with salt and anticipation. Richard's voice echoed in my mind. "Let truth be your lawyer." I smiled to myself. The law might take time, but the truth was already spreading faster than Evelyn could contain it. The files, the letter, the video, it was all too perfect to be coincidence. Richard had left me not just evidence, but a plan. By the time I drove back to the villa, the rain had stopped. The sky had cleared just enough for a slice of sunset to break through the clouds, painting the water gold. I parked in front of the gates and looked up at the house, the lights flickering on inside like the place was waking up again. I whispered softly, "You built this fortress, Richard, and I'm guarding it, just like you knew I would." Then I reached into my purse, touched the cold metal of the drive, and smiled. Because I finally held the hidden key, and I knew exactly when to use it. The next week felt like the calm after a shipwreck. Everything quiet, but nothing still. Michael and Evelyn's world was collapsing piece by piece, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. The banks had called in their debts, the investors were pulling out, and the whispers in town had turned into open talk. I heard from Arthur almost every day now. "They're finished," he said over the phone one morning. "Evelyn's name is in 6 reports. Fraud, forgery, misuse of funds. The state's moving fast, but Lydia, you don't need to be involved. The evidence speaks for itself." "I'm not looking for revenge," I said. "Just peace, the kind that can't be stolen." He sighed softly. "Then you've already earned it." But peace isn't always quiet. That evening there was a knock at my door, soft at first, then desperate. I opened it to find Michael standing in the rain, his hair soaked, his expression hollow. He looked like a man who'd run out of excuses. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracking. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside, and he walked in slowly, dripping water onto the hardwood. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I just watched him, my heart torn between love and disappointment. He finally said, "We lost everything." I nodded. So I heard. She's gone, he said quietly. Evelyn. She packed a bag and left this morning. Said she couldn't handle it anymore. I didn't ask where she went. I didn't need to. You should sit down, I said. He sank into the couch, head in his hands. I don't even know where to start. Everything's gone. The accounts, the house, the business. They froze everything. And it's my fault. I trusted her. I thought I could fix it, and I just kept digging deeper. Michael, I said softly, do you remember what your father used to tell you about shortcuts? He nodded weakly. He said shortcuts always lead to cliffs. I smiled sadly. And here we are. He looked up, eyes red. I never meant to hurt you. I know, I said. But you did. His shoulders shook slightly. I don't even know who I am anymore. You're still my son, I said gently. That's never changed. But maybe now you understand that family doesn't mean ownership. It means respect. You can lose money, but respect, you have to earn it back. He rubbed his eyes. How do I even start? By telling the truth, I said. All of it. To yourself first. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking. She lied to me, Mom, about everything. The deals, the accounts, even about Dad's company. She told me you'd signed everything over years ago. I believed her because it was easier than asking questions. I reached for the old teapot and poured him a cup, the same way I used to when he was a child coming home from school with scraped knees. The truth has a way of waiting for people, I said. It doesn't disappear. It just sits quietly until you're ready to see it. He stared at the steam rising from the cup. Are you going to press charges? I don't have to, I said. The law is already doing its job. He swallowed hard. What about me? That depends, I said, meeting his eyes. Do you want forgiveness or do you want a change? He looked at me for a long time before whispering, both. The storm outside had quieted to a soft drizzle. He leaned back, exhausted, and I could see the boy he used to be beneath all that failure, the one who used to help his father carry tools around the garden, who used to run barefoot along the sand, laughing like the world would never end. For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity, and something smaller, sadder, understanding. Later that night, after he fell asleep on the couch, I walked into the study and opened the small lockbox Richard had left for me. Inside were the final papers transferring Blue Harbor and the villa to a new entity, the Harbor Women's Trust, a foundation he'd designed quietly years ago, meant to support widows and single mothers who had nowhere to go. I smiled through tears. You really did think of everything, didn't you, Richard? I placed the USB and documents inside and locked it again. The villa wasn't just my home anymore. It was a promise to rebuild something good from what greed had tried to ruin. When I returned to the living room, Michael stirred. His eyes opened groggily. Mom? Rest, I said softly. Tomorrow will be hard, but it'll be the start of something better. He nodded faintly and fell asleep again. I covered him with a blanket and turned off the lights. The house was quiet, except for the distant rumble of waves against the shore. The storm had passed, but I knew the real reckoning was still coming, the moment when truth would no longer hide behind family ties. As I stood there in the half-darkness, I realized something Richard once told me was finally true. You can lose everything and still come out richer if you keep your soul intact. And maybe that was what this had all been about. By morning, the first light slipped through the curtains, pale and soft. Michael was still sleeping. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and watched the sun rise over the ocean, our ocean. The tide had turned, just like Richard said it would. It was Friday evening when I decided to host the dinner, not as a celebration, but as a reckoning. I sent the invitations myself, simple handwritten notes delivered by courier. One to Michael, one to Evelyn, and one to Harper. The note said only 3 words: family, dinner, truth. Arthur told me I was taking a risk, but I disagreed. Sometimes silence must end with a sound loud enough to echo. By the time the sun dipped behind the water, the dining room of the villa was glowing with candlelight. I had the long oak table set with white linen, crystal glasses, and the silverware Richard and I used only for special occasions. The room smelled faintly of rosemary and salt. The windows were open, letting in the ocean breeze. I wanted the sea to witness what was about to happen. Harper arrived first. She was wearing a simple navy dress, her expression calm but uncertain. "Grandma," she said softly, "is this really a good idea?" "It's necessary," I said. "The truth deserves an audience." Michael came next. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. He looked like someone who had run out of ways to explain himself. He didn't say much, just hugged Harper quietly and nodded toward me. Then, 10 minutes late, Evelyn arrived. Her hair was perfectly styled as always, her perfume heavy enough to fill the room before her voice did. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome," she said. "You're always welcome," I replied evenly. "You just may not like what's served." She smiled thinly and took her seat across from me. The tension in the room was palpable, the kind you could almost hear crackling between breaths. Dinner began quietly. I served roasted salmon and vegetables, dishes Richard had loved. Harper tried to keep the conversation gentle, but it was like trying to smooth ripples on storm water. Evelyn barely touched her food. Michael kept his eyes down. Finally, I set down my fork and folded my napkin. "There's something I'd like to say." Evelyn's eyes lifted sharply. "Of course you would." I ignored the jab. "For months I've watched this family unravel. Lies, greed, betrayal, all dressed up as necessity. But the truth has a way of surviving the storms." Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Mom." "No," I said gently. "Let me finish." I reached for the envelope I'd placed beside my plate, the same one from Richard's lockbox, and set it on the table. "Your father left this company, Blue Harbor, to me. Every document, every share, every decision leads back here." I looked at Evelyn. "Which means every fraudulent act you made in its name is yours alone to answer for." Her face tightened. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I opened the envelope and slid the documents toward her. Ownership certificates, notarized signatures, and finally, a copy of Richard's recorded statement. The air seemed to thicken as the weight of the papers landed. Evelyn's hand trembled as she reached for them. The color drained from her face as she read the line confirming my full control. "This isn't possible," she whispered. "Oh, it's very possible," I said calmly. "It's just inconvenient." Michael looked from her to me, confusion and shame warring in his eyes. "Dad knew all this time?" "Yes," I said. "He knew people can change when money starts speaking louder than love, so he built a wall high enough to protect what mattered. He built it for me, and for you." Evelyn slammed her hand against the table. "You can't just take everything." I didn't flinch. "I didn't take anything, Evelyn. You tried to. I'm simply putting it back where it belongs." Harper, who had been silent until now, spoke up softly. "Mom, Grandma isn't your enemy. You did this to yourself." Evelyn turned toward her, her voice cracking. "You're my daughter. You should be on my side." "I'm on the side that's right," Harper said firmly. The room went utterly silent. The only sound was the sea outside, rising and falling against the rocks. I pushed my chair back slightly and stood. "I'm transferring the villa and everything under Blue Harbor to a foundation called the Harbor Women's Trust. It's something your father built years ago. Its purpose is to help women who've lost their footing, widows, mothers, daughters trying to start over. It won't make me rich, but it'll make me whole." Michael looked stunned. Evelyn stared at me as if she'd been struck. "You're giving it away?" she asked in disbelief. "I'm giving it meaning," I said. "Something money could never do." Her eyes filled with tears, though not the kind born of remorse. "You've destroyed us." "No," I said gently. "I've freed us. You were trapped by greed. Michael was trapped by guilt. And I was trapped by love. It's time we all walked out of our cages." No one spoke for a long time. Harper reached over and took my hand. Michael's eyes shimmered with the beginning of something fragile, understanding, maybe even humility. Evelyn sat perfectly still, her pride folding in on itself like a collapsing star. Finally, I broke the silence. "Dinner's over, but the truth, that stays." I stood and began clearing the plates myself. One by one, they rose and followed suit, though no one said a word. When the table was cleared, I turned toward the large glass doors. Outside, the sea was calm again, its surface gleaming under the moonlight. I looked back at them and said quietly, "I don't need revenge. I just need peace." Evelyn left first, without a word. Michael lingered, then hugged me tightly before he went. Harper stayed a little longer, holding my hand until the candles burned low. When she finally left, I blew out the last flame and stood there in the darkened room, listening to the steady sound of the waves. The truth had done its work. The storm had passed. The villa was silent after they left, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. This one was cleaner, quieter, almost sacred. It was the sound that comes when the noise of lies finally dies out. I walked through the house slowly, running my fingers along the walls, the furniture, the windows that had seen every argument and every apology. The air smelled faintly of salt and extinguished candles. For the first time in months, the place felt like it belonged to me again, not because of ownership, but because of peace. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the ocean outside was still wrapped in gray mist. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the waves roll in, each one dissolving into foam and pulling back again. That rhythm had always soothed me. Richard used to say the sea was the closest thing to truth, relentless, honest, and impossible to control. Around mid-morning, Arthur called. His tone was calm, but I could hear the satisfaction behind it. "Lydia," he said, "it's done. The trust transfer has been finalized. The Harbor Women's Trust is now the legal owner of the villa and all its assets. The state reviewed the paperwork, and everything checked out perfectly. They even commended how thorough the documentation was. Richard would be proud." I smiled faintly. "He already is," I said. "I can feel it." "There's something else," Arthur added. "Evelyn's been served with formal notice. Fraud charges are being prepared. I doubt she'll fight them. She doesn't have the strength anymore." "I don't want to see her punished," I said quietly. Just stopped. "Then you've succeeded," he said. "Sometimes the cleanest victories are the quiet ones." After we hung up, I stood for a while, staring at the sunlight beginning to spill across the floor. It glowed on the wood, warm and golden, like forgiveness. A few hours later, I heard footsteps outside. When I opened the door, Michael was standing there again. This time he wasn't angry or desperate, just tired. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of everything he'd carried had finally started to lift. "Can I come in?" he asked. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. He walked into the living room and sat down on the couch, his eyes moving slowly across the space. "It's strange," he said softly. "I used to think this house was just a place, but now I realize it's a memory." "It's both," I said. "The place holds the memories. You just have to decide which ones you want to keep." He nodded, then took a deep breath. "They're going to investigate me too," he said. "The lawyers think I signed some of the papers. Even if I didn't know what I was signing, it doesn't matter. I'm responsible." I didn't say anything. I just let him speak. "I'm not asking you to fix it," he continued. "I just needed to say I'm sorry. For everything. For not listening. For letting her convince me you were in the way." I looked at him carefully, the boy I'd raised hidden somewhere inside the man he'd become. "Michael," I said softly, "you lost yourself trying to please someone who never loved you the way you deserved. But you can still find your way back. The truth doesn't erase what you did, but it gives you a chance to become better." His eyes glistened. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" "I already have," I said. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It just means I won't carry your mistakes anymore." He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. When he finally looked up, he was crying. Not the quiet, self-pitying tears from before, but the kind that come when a person finally lets the truth in. When he left, he hugged me tightly, holding on longer than he had in years. "Thank you," he whispered. After he was gone, I stood at the window again, watching his car disappear down the winding road. The ocean shimmered beneath the sun, calm and endless. The storm had taken so much, but it had given something back too, a strange kind of stillness that felt almost like grace. That afternoon, Harper came by. She carried a small bouquet of daisies in her hands. "Grandma," she said, smiling softly, "I just wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine, actually." She looked around the house and sighed. "It feels different now." "It is," I said. "The air's lighter. Lies take up space, you know. When they're gone, the house can finally breathe again." Harper placed the flowers in a vase on the dining table, the same one where everything had unraveled the night before. She turned back to me. "Dad told me about the trust, about what you did. That's really beautiful." "It's what your grandfather wanted," I said. "He always believed wealth should circle back to goodness. I just helped it find its way home." Harper hugged me, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, Grandma." I smiled. "No, sweetheart, I'm proud of you, for seeing people clearly, even when it hurts." When she left, the house grew quiet again. But it wasn't lonely this time. It was peaceful, filled with the echoes of laughter, arguments, and truths finally spoken aloud. That night, I lit a single candle and sat by the window. The sea stretched out beneath the moon, vast and eternal. I thought of Richard, of all the choices that had led to this moment. He'd always said I was stronger than I believed. Maybe now I finally was. The wind brushed through the open door, carrying the scent of salt and light. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's done, Richard. We kept it safe." For the first time in a long while, I slept deeply, dreamless and unburdened. The morning light came in soft and golden, spilling across the living room like a quiet blessing. I woke earlier than usual, feeling rested in a way I hadn't felt in years. The sea outside was calm, the waves gentle and rhythmic, brushing the shore as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong. For the first time since Richard passed, the villa didn't feel haunted. It felt alive. I made my tea, opened the balcony doors, and let the cool breeze fill the room. On the desk near the window, a single sheet of paper sat waiting for me, blank except for the faint shadow of sunlight across it. It had been there for days, an invitation I'd been avoiding. But now I knew what to write. It was time to say what needed to be said, not just to close the story, but to pass it on. I sat down, smoothed the page flat, and began. My dearest Harper, if you're reading this, it means time has done what it always does. It's moved forward, and we've both changed in ways we couldn't have predicted. I wanted to write this not as your grandmother, but as a woman who has lived long enough to learn that love and truth are sometimes the same thing, even when they hurt. You've seen more than a girl your age should have seen: lies, fear, pride, loss. But you've also seen something rare: how truth can survive even the ugliest storms. That's what this letter is really about. You stood by me when others looked away. You asked questions when silence would have been easier. And you reminded me that courage doesn't always look like shouting. It often looks like staying, watching, listening. The trust your grandfather built, the Harbor Women's Trust, is now officially yours to guide one day. I'm only its caretaker for now. But when you're ready, it will be in your hands. Don't see it as a burden. See it as a compass. It's meant to help women who have been told their stories are over when, in truth, they're only beginning. Your grandfather built the company to protect what we earned. I've turned it into something to protect what others dream of earning: a chance, a home, a start. If one woman sleeps safely under a roof because of this trust, then every betrayal we endured will have been worth it. I stopped writing and looked out toward the horizon, where the sea met the sky in a soft blur. The world looked enormous again, full of the kind of hope that only comes after loss. Then I continued, "Harper, I want you to remember something for the rest of your life. Justice isn't always about punishment. It's about remembrance. It's about making sure truth isn't forgotten, even when people try to bury it. Sometimes the loudest victories are the quiet ones, the ones whispered over dinner tables, shared through small acts of kindness, or passed down in letters like this one. People will tell you to forgive quickly, to move on before you've understood what happened. Don't. Forgiveness without understanding isn't grace, it's surrender. Take your time, feel the ache, learn from it, then let it go when it's ready to leave you. And about your father, love him. Even when you can't respect his choices, love him. He's learning in his own way. Pain teaches best when pride finally gets quiet. Don't carry his guilt. Carry his lessons instead." I paused again, my eyes stinging with tears I didn't try to stop. The sound of the waves grew louder, as if the sea wanted to listen. "One day, when you come back to this villa, you'll see that I've renamed it. It's no longer the Hartman Villa. It's now called Harbor Hope. That's what this place has become, a reminder that even after betrayal, hope still finds a way to live. I want you to fill this home with laughter again. Host gatherings, help those who need it, open the doors to women who have nowhere to go. Let them know that this house was once nearly stolen, but was reclaimed not through anger, but through truth. If there's one lesson I hope you keep, it's this. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's strength. But when you do speak, Harper, let your words mean something. Let them build, not destroy." I smiled as I wrote the final lines, hearing Richard's voice in my memory, the low, steady tone he used when he was sure of something. Justice isn't revenge. It's remembering who you are. I signed my name and set the pen down. The words looked simple on the page, but I knew they carried the weight of a lifetime. I folded the letter neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and sealed it with a small piece of wax the color of the sea. Then I placed it inside the top drawer of Richard's old desk, the same drawer where I'd found his first letter to me all those years ago. When I looked out the window again, the tide was shifting, pulling away from the shore. I imagined Harper reading this letter someday, standing where I was standing now, with the same wind in her hair and the same peace in her chest. I whispered softly, "It's yours now, sweetheart, all of it." The waves answered with a rhythm only the sea could make, endless, eternal, forgiving. A year passed before I realized how much had changed. Seasons slipped through the house like old friends, winter with its quiet patience, spring with its cautious bloom. The villa no longer felt like a reminder of pain. It had become something else entirely, a sanctuary built from lessons, not loss. They called it Harbor Hope Center now. The brass letters gleamed on the white archway at the entrance, just above the newly painted gates. Every time I walked past them, I felt Richard's presence beside me, steady and proud. It was no longer just a home. It was a place for others to begin again. Women came from everywhere. Some carried suitcases filled with more sorrow than clothes. Others came with nothing at all except determination. We gave them a place to rest, a meal, a voice that told them they weren't invisible. I saw pieces of myself in all of them, the fear, the disbelief, the quiet strength buried underneath. Harper became my right hand. She handled most of the administration, the emails, the meetings. But what made me proud wasn't how she managed the paperwork. It was how she listened. She listened the way Richard used to, with full attention and no hurry. When a woman cried, Harper didn't try to fix her. She let her speak, then offered hope like a candle in a dark room. One afternoon I found her standing on the terrace, staring out at the sea the way I used to. The air smelled of salt and jasmine. "Grandma," she said softly, "it's beautiful here, peaceful, but sometimes I can still feel what happened, the pain that built all of this." I smiled faintly. "That's not pain anymore, sweetheart. That's memory. Pain fades. Memory teaches." She turned to me. "Do you ever wish it hadn't happened? The betrayal, the fight, all of it?" I thought for a long moment. The waves rolled in, slow and deliberate, glinting gold under the sun. "No," I said finally, "because if it hadn't happened, you wouldn't have learned what truth feels like, and neither would I." She looked out at the horizon again. "Dad sends postcards now. He's in Arizona, working for a construction company. He said he's trying to start over." "That's good," I said. "The world's big enough for second chances. He just needed to find one without someone else's lies attached to it." She smiled. "He wrote that he's proud of you, of this place." I felt something in my chest soften. Tell him I'm proud of him too. Starting again isn't weakness. It's courage in disguise. As the day faded, the women gathered in the courtyard for dinner. The sound of laughter mixed with the gulls and the waves. Someone played a guitar softly. I stood at the window watching them, feeling the warmth rise through me like sunlight after rain. It wasn't a perfect world, not yet, but it was a good one. And that was enough. That evening, Harper brought me a framed photograph she'd found while organizing old boxes. It was a picture of Richard and me standing on the villa balcony long before any of this happened. My hair was darker then, my smile unguarded. Richard's arm was around me, and behind us, the sea stretched endlessly, blue and bright. "I think it belongs here," Harper said, hanging it on the main wall near the entrance, "so everyone who walks in knows who started it." I looked at the photo for a long time. "No, sweetheart," I said quietly, "so they know why it started." When night came, I stepped outside onto the balcony. The ocean shimmered under the moonlight, vast and infinite. The rhythmic sound of the waves felt like an old lullaby, the same one that had carried me through grief, anger, and redemption. I whispered to the wind, "You were right, Richard." The tide turned. The wind brushed against my cheek, cool and soft, as if answering. Below, the lights from the center glowed warmly against the dark. Women were still awake, talking, laughing, living. The sea kept its rhythm, pulling back, returning, constant, just like life. I stood there for a long while, letting the air fill my lungs, the sound of the water grounding me in the present. The house that once held secrets now held voices. The walls that once heard lies now heard laughter. Maybe that was what legacy really was. Not money, not property, but the courage to turn pain into purpose. And for the first time in all the years I'd lived by this ocean, I didn't feel like the waves were taking anything away. They were giving something back. The morning came quietly, the kind of quiet that doesn't demand attention. It just exists. I woke before sunrise, the sky still painted in shades of silver and soft pink. The sound of the ocean filtered through the open windows, steady and alive. It had become my heartbeat now. Every wave, every breath of wind carried the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that had been set free. I sat at my desk, the same spot where I had written to Harper months ago, and looked out at the horizon. The world beyond the glass looked endless, untouched. The villa, now Harbor Hope Center, was waking slowly. I could hear faint laughter downstairs, the clinking of dishes, footsteps echoing on the marble floors. Women who had arrived broken were now laughing again. I smiled. That sound, that was the sound of survival. My tea had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I wasn't thinking about the past anymore, not in the way I used to. The pain, the betrayal, even the anger, they had become threads in a larger tapestry. I no longer needed to pull them apart. They belonged there, stitched into the pattern of my life. I stood and walked to the balcony. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and blooming lavender. The sea shimmered in the soft light, calm but powerful, exactly the way I wanted to be remembered. People often talk about justice as if it's something loud, courtrooms, shouting, punishment. But justice can be quiet too. It can live in the way you stand tall when others expect you to fall. It can live in the choice to forgive, not because they deserve it, but because you do. I remembered the night of the dinner, Evelyn's trembling voice, Michael's tears, Harper's courage. They were all lessons, each one shaping me in ways I never expected. I didn't hate them anymore. I didn't even pity them. I understood them, and in that understanding, I found peace. The door creaked softly behind me. Harper stepped out onto the balcony, a blanket draped around her shoulders. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, smiling. I shook my head. "Just thinking." She leaned against the railing beside me, looking out at the water. "It's beautiful," she said. "It always was," I replied. We just had to clear the noise to hear it. We stood there in silence for a while, watching the light change. The first line of the sun broke over the horizon, turning the ocean into molten gold. Harper reached over and took my hand. Hers was warm and steady. "Grandma," she said softly, "you know this place, what you built. It's more than a legacy. It's a heartbeat. People will remember you for this." I squeezed her hand gently. "Then promise me something. Anything." "When they do remember me," I said, "make sure they remember not what I lost, but what I learned." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I promise." A long moment passed. The sunlight touched our faces, warm and bright. The sound of the waves blended with the quiet hum of morning. Somewhere downstairs, someone began to play a piano, soft, hesitant notes that grew into something steady and hopeful. I looked out at the endless water and felt something in me finally settle. "They sold the villa thinking it was theirs," I said quietly, more to the sea than to anyone else. "But peace was mine all along." Harper smiled. "That sounds like something Grandpa would have said." "Maybe he did," I whispered, my eyes on the horizon. "And maybe he was just waiting for me to believe it." The wind lifted the edge of my hair, carrying it back like a sigh. I could almost feel Richard there, not as a ghost, but as a presence woven into the world around me. The air, the water, the quiet strength inside me. Life would go on. Harper would carry the torch. The women downstairs would rebuild their lives. And I, for the first time in years, could finally rest knowing that the story didn't end in loss. It ended in legacy. I took one last deep breath, letting the sea air fill my lungs. The world was wide, the morning soft, and everything was exactly as it should be. As the sunlight spilled across the balcony, I whispered one final time, not out of pain, but gratitude. "Thank you, Richard, we kept it safe." And with that, the sound of the waves faded into silence, steady, endless, eternal.